So I'd like to welcome everyone to our third meeting of the year. And this is a very special meeting because we have Cherie Sorokin, and I hope I got that right,
You did?
uh, who's, who's, who is the chair of the AAUW National Board. And so, boy, we have the important person here. And we have a joint meeting with AAUW Washington and AAUW California. So it's not just our Oregon members. I'd like to know, I haven't seen her, but she may come in later. Is Kelby here? Kelby Comer? Kelby Comer is the president of AAUW Washington, and Gail Swain is the president of AAUW California Online. I should have said Washington Online because we're the three online branches. So one of the things I would like you to do is please everyone mute yourselves so that we don't have any weird noises coming in during the presentation. We will have questions. If you think of your question, you can type it into the chat, but the questions will be answered at the end of the session or at the end of um, Cherie's talk. Uh, we'll have announcements at the end, and we have Pat Lehman will handle the questions and answers at the end. She's so good at that, and she does that for all our guests. Pat Lehman is a former AAUW of Oregon president, so we have several past presidents hanging around. So let us just get going with our program. And I'm asking Randa Blanding, who is our online communication VP, and she happens to be the communication VP for AAUW of Oregon. So Randa, please take it away.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. In August, both Cherie and I were both in a committee day in San Diego. I asked her if she'd be willing to speak to us in the spring. She agreed, but we didn't settle on a date. So in December, I either left her a message or I emailed her. Then on January 21st, in the middle of nowhere, on a bus in Costa Rica, my phone rang. Lo and behold, it was her returning my message. After a good laugh, we agreed on a Tuesday in March. That happens to be the day that we ended up settling on for today. Therefore, I would like to introduce Cheryl or Cherie Sorokin. She's an attorney who spent much of her career working for Bank of America. She was an executive vice president and corporate secretary. She's a published author on corporate governance and now consults on governance matters. Currently, she is a recent past president of Marin Villages, a nonprofit that helps older adults remain active, connected, and independent in their homes. Regarding AAUW, she has held leadership positions at the branch and national level, including serving on the national board since 2017, where she is the outgoing president or chairman now. She's a current member of California Online, and we thank and welcome Cherie for sharing her thoughts, and she will be engaging us in letting us ask questions to her. Thank you very much for coming.
You're very welcome. And, I should say that it is the 2017 on the national board is due to a fluke that we changed our bylaws kind of in the middle of things, and everybody's terms restarted. It was like, hey, I only signed up for 4 years, and instead I've been here for a longer time. But I've only been chair for a year. I'm leaving at the end of May, and I have to say it's been a wonderful opportunity to serve on the national board. I'm an AAUW junkie. I'm a life member. My mom made sure that I joined right after I graduated from college. I was raised by AAUW women before then, and I've been in, I think, 5 branches across the country. And so like 90% of my friends are AAUW women from across the country. And it was I guess the right word is to say, a safe space for me as I was climbing the corporate ladder, because it was the one place where you could really talk about the kind of discrimination that you face as a woman in careers, whether it was teaching, which is where I started, or going to law school, or then later becoming a lawyer, trying to find a job, and then working my way up the Bank of America. So I'm so grateful to AAUW, and that's what led me to ultimately raise my hand and said I would serve on the national board. So I understand what you want to hear is like, what does the national board do anyway, right? What's going on up there? And so I'm going to talk about that, but I want to also talk a little bit at the start about just governance issues. I've spent my whole life in governance, and it's come in really handy as an AAUW member. I was president of Marin branch 3 times and San Francisco branch once, and it helps to know a little bit about governance. The AAUW National Board is what we call in governance terms a governing board, as opposed to an operating board. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that actually means. There's no, one is not better than the other. The reason that there are 2 different types of boards is the nature of the organization. The mission, the extent of, so a governing board would not normally be the choice, the governance choice you'd make if you had a small nonprofit with a very local mission, but it certainly is very handy for a large nonprofit, a national nonprofit. The main differences have to do with, again, mission, the amount of assets that the organization has to manage, and staff versus non-staff organizations. Now, some things are the same regardless of the type of organization that you are. All nonprofits, all boards of nonprofits provide leadership and direction to help assure that the entity is achieving its mission and fulfilling its obligations under law, which there are several that they have to do, and fulfilling its obligations to clients, beneficiaries, donors, volunteers, and the public. And the public is very important because the reason nonprofits are nonprofits is that they have a tax break. There are 2 kinds. You get a tax break as an entity. You don't have to pay most taxes. And some organizations those are 501c4 organizations, which I'm pretty sure you've heard of. And 501c3 organizations are the ones where the donors also get a tax break. You get to deduct take a deduction for your contributions to the nonprofit. The primary functions kind of vary and mainly have to do with whether or not there's staff. A governing board oversees the activities of the CEO, not so much of the individuals that work for the organization, because the CEO is responsible for that. In a operating nonprofit, there is no staff. The operating board is, in fact, the staff, only unpaid. They're actually doing the work. And in AAUW, the national board is a governing board pretty much all the time. And the state affiliates and branches are normally operating entities. I don't think that we have any governing boards at the affiliate level because there's no paid staff working for most organizations. I think California has a half a person. Julica is is a staff person, but only half time. So the primary functions, are really decision making for the overall direction of the organization, and that's true whether you're an operating board or a governing board. There are a few nonprofits, like trade organizations, that may have a more shared responsibility among the members of the trade association for governance, but mostly boards make those big decisions. And they also provide leadership for the organization as a whole. So the cheerleading function, among other things, but just general dedication to the mission of the organization and trying to make sure the organization thrives. If there is a staff, the governing board will look at managing the CEO, but not the staff below the CEO for the most part. And sometimes, but not always, the board of directors of a nonprofit is responsible for fundraising. And most nonprofits, the better practice these days is to require some sort of financial contribution from everybody on the board, just as a symbol of your commitment to that organization. That becomes very important when you have to fundraise from outside the organization, because donors, big corporate donors, for example, will not give money to organizations where the board is not personally invested. So all boards also have fiduciary duties. I'm sure you all know about these. They said, you learn about this stuff in college. The two fiduciary duties that are most recognized are the duty of care, making sure that you know what you're doing. You've read the material, you paid attention, that you're active. You don't just go to the board meetings and not know what you're doing. That's the duty of care. And then the duty of loyalty, which means you don't take away a benefit that could accrue to the organization for yourself. You don't buy stuff on the cheap just because from the organization, just because you're a director. The most famous examples of malfeasance in this area are art museums, where collectors are on the board and they end up convincing somebody to sell them the Picasso instead of the museum, right? That's a clear classic duty of loyalty breach. The people that monitor this, people following the rules here, are basically the attorneys general of all the states, because you're given a tax break. And so they monitor, are you paying attention? Are you doing the right thing? The IRS, to a lesser degree, monitors, but it also can take away a nonprofit status. It doesn't like to be involved in enforcement. It generally leaves that to states' attorneys general, who then, take away the state nonprofit status, and you can't be a national nonprofit without a state nonprofit status as well. The other major thing is that boards act collectively. They, individual directors don't have a say, except as voting at a board meeting. And typically in governance boards, the board has delegated authority not to individual members of the board, but to the staff. And they just don't get involved with the minute day-to-day operations. Now, so think of that as like high-level listening and advice giving, but not sitting down at a computer and fixing something, right? They just don't do that. Operating boards are typically both the board members are doing board functions and operating functions. That is, they are actually doing the work of the organization. So there's some overlap. And if there's a crisis, a governing board will kind of convert itself into an operating board often. It's sometimes hard to get them back up to the governing level once they've been down in the details. But for the most part, big nonprofits have really governing boards that are not involved in the day-to-day operations. So AAUW is also a membership organization, which is another sort of type of organization in which certain responsibilities are left to the members to vote on. And over time, membership organizations used to have, a long time ago, they used to have far more powers than they do now. Over time, people have figured out it doesn't really work so much to leave too much power in the hands of individual members who don't see how things really operate on a day-to-day basis, or don't have a perspective that's really broad enough in terms of managing an organization. So for the most part, the things that are left now for most membership organizations are things like electing the directors, deciding whether to merge or dissolve, making major changes to bylaws, things like that. Most branches of AAUW are membership organizations. As far as I know, we don't have any that are not membership organizations, but you must make an affirmative choice to be a membership organization, and you have to mirror that in your bylaws and your articles as well. So now back to AAUW. What do we spend time on after all of that? So in the past 24 months, and most specifically in my tenure as board chair, we've been looking at sort of what is it that AAUW does best, and where is our highest potential for impact, and what can we afford to do, And how do we address some of the issues that are clearly holding us back as an organization? And one of those things that is holding us back is our structure as a membership organization, frankly, not because it's a membership organization itself, but because younger people tend not to join organizations that are structured like AAUW. They tend not to want to go to meetings. They don't want to hear a speaker. They're not, they're much more project focused. Sometimes they're issue focused, and they just want to know that somebody else is doing stuff, and maybe occasionally they'll send some money to help you do it. That is one of the big issues that AAUW faces, and I have to say we're not alone. Rotary International faces this. They lose like 100,000 members a year, right? And they get a bunch of them back, but they keep dropping in numbers. And that's around the world, not just in the US. Soroptimist is another organization, same thing, losing members more than it's gaining members. League of Women Voters is just going through a huge uproar over losing members, and particularly not gaining younger members. So these organizations that we all grew up with and know and love, right, are all struggling as national organizations to continue the same kind of structure that they've had in the past. And of course, we're all human beings, so none of us wants to give up what we love, right? The things that have been important to us, and so thinking about change is really hard. So specifically, the things that the National Board has been engaged in, and a lot of this you'll see harks back to sort of the fiduciary responsibilities of a big board. We do strategic planning. We've been really focused on that for the last 2 years. There will be an announcement coming up this spring about changes to our strategic plan. I tried really hard to not use the word strategic plan, and our CEO, I think, feels the same way, but people are so used to that, we decided just go ahead and use it. But what we're really talking about are our priorities for the next, in this case, 2 years, maybe 3 years. Most strategic plans, the kind we thought of or maybe had experience with if you worked for a corporation, they were big binders and they ended up on the shelf and nobody really looked at them for 5 years, and then they took them down and said, oh wow, we should change our strategic plan. So hopefully this will not be that way. This was going to focus us intently for a few years on some specific areas that are tied to what are our strengths, what do we do best, where is our impact, and what's happening around us right now, including the current administration, which we'll talk about later, and how that impacts us. So again, what do we do best, how the world is changing, how do we adapt? That's all part of establishing our priorities. Financial oversight. We spend a lot of time on financial issues now and for the future. Revenue and expense, obviously, restricted versus unrestricted funding levels. I'm sure all of you have, well, I hope all of you have seen or at least heard of Peggy Cabinas's presentation. She's our finance vice chair. That she shows, she used Legos to describe AAUW's financial situation. And she's got three towers of Legos, that one really, really tall that represents our endowed funds, one that's kind of medium that represents temporarily restricted funds, and one teeny weeny little one that is our unrestricted funding, which is big growing. And thanks to all of you who contribute to on an unrestricted basis, it's been growing a lot in the past few years, but still for an organization our size, it's not as big as we would like to see it, because the endowed funds can only be used for certain purposes, and you can only use the interest on the endowed funds, and not all the interest, only a certain amount, right, of interest, and also principal. You can use some of the principal. And then the funds that in the middle, the temporarily restricted, can only be used for the specific purpose. You can use them all up, even in one fell swoop if you want, but you can use them, principal and interest, but you must use them for a very specific purpose. And unrestricted is really what we want, because we want to be able to have the flexibility to do lots of different things as things change. We also have been do budget, the budget for the national organization, and the goal has been to have going forward a non-deficit budget, that is a balanced budget, and that's harder than you think. It's just really tough to do it. It's also at the national level, the accounting for organizations that have an endowment is exceptionally convoluted and just difficult to deal with. And so it complicates the budgeting process, and it skews how people think of AAUW. I posted in chat a link to the annual report, and I'll ask Nancy maybe to bring it up later, but the picture of it. But if you look in that, it looks like, AAUW has more revenue than you would expect based on hearing us say we don't have any money. But it's because of the accounting rules for auditing are different than the accounting rules for reporting to the IRS. So you can look at our Form 990, and you can also look at our audited financials, which are posted on the website, and you see two different numbers, and you think, what are those people crazy? They're reporting two different numbers for revenue. No, it's the accounting rules that make you do that. So you can imagine a board, when you go on the board, if you don't have an accounting background, you've got a really steep learning curve to understand that. We also, of course, look at audits. We have a clean audit, which is no easy matter these days. Auditing is another one of those things where the rules have gotten tighter and tighter. And then we also look at our investments. Our investment committee does just a really marvelous job managing AAUW's 126 million in investments that we make through our endowed funds and other monies that come in. It's all the money that comes into AAUW is invested, but they are managing that the endowed funds for the long term, and they do a great job. Any of you who are wealth managers or have any experience in managing money, please apply for the investment committee. I mean, we really need experts in this. This is one area where the background is really, really important of the people who are on that committee. They have to actually go head to head with our financial planning person, the account manager at a really big firm that we use to help us with our investments. And it's just really important to have people with expertise. So if you've got it, please apply to be on the investment committee. Another area that we spend a lot of time on is risk oversight now and for the future. And I think I'm going to list these risks, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about them. But the biggest risk right now is legal risk. The current administration has heightened the risk to our organization of our ability to actually execute on our mission. Gender is in the target zone, as well as race. So when you hear issues about doing away with DEI kind of thing, they're not just talking about DEI programming. They're not just talking about the phrase. They're talking about programs that are essentially what we grew up with thinking of as affirmative action. So anything that is designed to help women achieve, or women of color in particular achieve, is coming in the crosshairs. And it's not just us, but it's also organizations that do business with us, such as universities and colleges that we wish to partner with. Now, nothing has happened so far, except we did have one lawsuit last year. This was pre the Trump administration, but it was part of the group that is supporting the Trump administration's, or the Project 2025 group. We were sued because one of our fellowships provided, it said that there was not a preference, but one of the requirements was that you were a woman of color or a woman from a certain economic level in order to get the fellowship complete your third year of medical school, or your third year of law school, or your third or fourth year of engineering, a graduate engineering program. So we had to settle that lawsuit because we don't have the wherewithal, basically, to fight a lawsuit like that. And aside from that, we were afraid of making bad law because, as our lawyer said, can you count to 5? Meaning, can you count to 5 Supreme Court justices that will vote with you? And there weren't 5 Supreme Court justices that would have supported our case. So we didn't want to make bad law, and we settled that lawsuit. We do expect that there will probably be a suit on gender at some point. Whether we'll be involved in it or some other organization that we, support will be involved in it, not clear. But that's legal risk has become a really big issue for us. I mean, what would AAUW be if we couldn't give fellowships and grants to women only, right? So you have to think about that. Like, now we do not take government money, which is great. So we're not losing any grants that we that are critical to our existence. We may not get a couple of grants that we wanted to get or that we have relied on in the past, but they don't threaten our existence if we don't get them because we don't take government funding. We are owed money by the government from the pandemic staff retention credit of about 400,000, something like that we have yet to receive, and we may never see it because you just don't know what the Trump administration is going to do with that money that was put out there under the Biden administration. So those are the kind of legal risks that we look at all the time. Like, what does it mean for us if we can't do this? How would we adapt? Do we need to adapt now? Things like that. We have tech risks, so the risks of cyber attacks, the risk of almost all of our employees work at least 2 days at home. And so you have the whole tech issue of they have their own computer. They now do not have their own computers. We had to buy laptop computers for everybody that had the proper level of security on them and that could connect to a network. But there's all that kind of tech risk that you have to worry about. We also have the tech risk of that we're an old organization and you have to upgrade all the time. Some of the upgrading was painful, as in the community hub, but was pretty much essential to keeping the organization really functioning because, as some of you may have heard on this, like the person who knew the system retired, right? And there was no backup. There was no, and this happens in big corporations too, believe me. There's it just doesn't, you have to continually upgrade. And if you don't continually upgrade, the cost and the time to make it happen is a problem. So we talk about that. We have compliance risk, mainly having to do with our filings that are necessary with the IRS and with other organizations. We have PR risk that we have to talk about. A few years ago, we had a story written about us in the Washington Post online thing about how some people who worked at AAUW felt that they weren't valued because of their race. And the story kind of never went anywhere, but you have that kind of PR risk if some employee raises an issue, or if something happens in one of our affiliates, the story becomes a national story because it gets associated with AAUW nationally. And we have fundraising risk. Will people still give money to us? And I have to say that, women's organizations in general get a minuscule amount of donations and women's causes, not just women's organizations, of all of the money that is, oops, Cherie just started talking to me, sorry, I don't know, we should be quiet. Of all of the organizations in the world that are given money, women's causes and organizations get, I think, less than 10%. And women are very, control a lot of the money, but they tend not to give to causes that are directly related to women's health, women's well-being, women's education. All of those things get less money than other things. So we worry about fundraising from our own members as well as from outside organizations. Let's see. I think, and then there's just sort of like the cultural risk that we talked about before, that young people don't want to join an organization like ours. So we need to be careful about how do we structure ourselves if we don't want to just die out, right? I mean, You got to bring in some new people. I'm sure you've all had trouble finding, new officers, right? Let alone new members. So you have to keep working on that and saying what will work going forward. And the final thing we look at, of course, are governance matters. So things, we have 6 committees at the national level. They're all very active. They're run by great people. We have 3 what we call member-facing committees: advancement, public policy, and inclusion and equity. And by the way, let me just clear up this mystery. It was never called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. It's always been the Inclusion and Equity Committee. So we didn't scrub our website or change anything about diversity just because of the Trump administration. I can't believe how many people have accused us of that, but no, it's always been the Inclusion and Equity Committee. So those 3 committees are sort of member-facing and work with how do we help affiliates, and how do we work together, the national and the affiliate level. And then we have the other committees are all governance committees. So the nominating committee, the governance committee, which works a lot on structure and bylaw issues, the finance committee, the investment committee, the audit committee. I'm sure I've left one out, but those are all sort of the traditional kind of governance committees. I don't know. I think that's probably enough for me. Why don't I just let you ask questions and we can see which direction it goes.
Okay, thank you. Anybody who has a question, we don't have to be too formal about this, just raise your hand. And
Bev has her hand
try to get
raised.
to you, but
Bev has her hand raised.
oh, okay. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Cherie. One of the questions I have, we just had a meeting yesterday with California at the state level dealing with branch development committee. And one of the statistics that came out was the fact that we normally had 10,000 members across the state of California. We're down to 8,000, and of those 8,000 members, 2,000 are honorary life members. Now that seems to be an issue. I don't know how it is, nationally, but we were talking about some ideas, and we talked about like raising the amount per state, but they don't do anything, with the state because they're, I'm a paid life member, but I still pay state and branch. So it's like we're really looking at some ideas that might help, because it could really help one of those Lego columns,
Yeah.
that we could do. How does that sort out? Do you have any suggestions? Because I'm sure we're not the only state that's dealing with that. And thank you so much.
Yeah. So we have about 6,000, almost 7,000 honorary life members. So, that's a lot of older women who have been loyal to AAUW for 50 years and no longer pay dues. And many of them do not contribute to AAUW either, although a number of them are Legacy Circle members, and many of them may not even tell us that they're Legacy Circle members. We also get, out of the blue, somebody leaves us $250,000 that hasn't ever paid dues. We didn't even know where they lived, right? But they turned out to be a member. So we're looking at that. Now, we did just raise dues for regular members, $2 over the next 2 years. We did hear back from people that the $5 over 5 years, each year, $5 for 5 years was too much. And so we reduced it. The truth of the matter is that membership dues do not even cover the cost of serving members. That is and many membership organizations have the same issue. It's a combination of inflation, a combination of the cost of just doing business over time, and the level of services requested from people. At AAUW, we are definitely looking at, can we do a special fundraising campaign, really, for the honorary life members? saying, look, we'd like you to contribute too. We know you contributed. We value the fact that you have been with us for 50 years, but we could use some donations from you and make that a regular fundraising thing. I don't think we'll go back on the 50-year member dues thing, changing that. It is amazing to see that we've still got 7,000 members who've been members for 50 years. I mean, I'm among them, but I do contribute separately. As a board member, I contribute specifically as a board member, but I've also always contributed, even when I don't have to pay dues, I contribute to my local branch, even though they don't ask me to, because I know that it costs money to run things. So yeah, I think, Bev, you're right. We should look at this. And hopefully we will continue to look at it. The board has encouraged the staff to look at this, and the advancement committee, I know, is looking at it really hard. And they're the ones that have the most interface directly with branches. So you'll probably hear more about it through the advancement committee. But it's a good idea. It's a good idea.
Thank you. I'm going to the chat for a minute. And in the chat, Toby says, this is fantastic information.
Oh, you're so welcome.
We need to know that. A question, though, or not really a question, but Catherine, our AAUW of Oregon state president, says, please talk about the uses of unrestricted funds. We have branches who don't send money to the Greatest Need Fund because they're concerned that the money isn't used for equity work, that it's used for too many salaries and overhead. Are they misinformed?
Well, who does the equity work at National? It's the people whose salaries we pay. We have paid staff who run the webinars, who do the communications with colleges and universities, who do the process of selecting members for fellowship, or not members, but people for fellowships. Everything that is done by the national organization is done by paid staff. Right? It is all focused on, now it is true, AAUW had, I think in 2017, we had well over 175 staff members. And when Kim Churches came in, sort of the first thing that she did was a reduction in force, a RIF as referred to in the corporate world. We now have 32 paid staff at the national level. That has consequences. It means we can't do a lot of the stuff that members remember that we did at one point in our life, or that people think that we did at one point in our life. The simple answer is, of course, it goes for salaries and overhead. That's what is producing the programming. That's what makes it possible for us to do what we do. Now, some people say, well, maybe they're paid too much. Well, we are located in Washington, D.C. It is an expensive place. We have to compete for people to work with us. It's hard to get people to work in nonprofits, even in the D.C. area, because of the pay level. So I guess my question is this: how else would we do our programming if we didn't have paid staff at the national level? There would not be an AAUW if you didn't have paid staff at the national level to oversee the programming that is done and the work that we do. And if there's not an AAUW at the national level, before long, there will not be an AAUW at the local level either. And so I think it's really a matter of trust. And I understand in some regard that members have felt that National has not listened to them, or there is a lack of trust. I don't know exactly where some of it came from, although it's been around since I've been a member for 50 years. And I remember people saying that they didn't trust that national office back when I was, just joining. So there's a communications gap to some degree. And to some degree, there's probably some truth in it that National didn't want to listen to the membership. They had other ideas. That's not true now. The staff does listen and value comments from members. We wish that we had a better way to answer the same questions that get asked year after year after year. But partially that's a problem. Oh, Marty, I just see you. Hi, Marty. Marty was on the board with me a while ago. Uh, partially, it's the design of the organization, the structure of the organization. Branch leadership changes every year, right? If it doesn't change at the president level, it changes at the board level. So different people, you have to re-educate people year after year after year, even though the questions remain the same. And so that's a structural issue that we struggle with, and probably is going to be really the hardest one to get out of the way. Now we're making changes. You may have noticed if you're a state, I don't know if you are on these or not at the online branch level, but at the state level, we have quarterly, less than 6 times a year, meetings now with state presidents. And when we don't have a president of a state, we invite the biggest branch person to join as well. So there's much greater communication directly between the national board and leadership. There are also far more webinars and opportunities for exchange of information, town halls that are being held. So hopefully the message is getting through that it's not that National would just wish everybody else would go away. That's not the case. And it also is not physically possible for us to do that because our funding comes from our members, right? Our funding does not come from the Carnegie Foundation or Bill Gates or Melinda Gates or anybody like that. Our funding comes from our members. That's what makes it possible for us to do the work.
Thank you. I don't see anything in the chat. Are there any hands up? I don't see any hands up.
Toby, maybe?
Toby has a hand up.
Oh, who does?
Toby.
Toby. Oh, okay. I'm not seeing that. Toby, go ahead.
She just took her hand down. So maybe she's
Toby,
got a
go ahead
question.
and unmute. I muted you previously. Please unmute yourself.
Okay,
Oh, there
now
she is.
can,
Okay.
I'm doing this on my iPad, so it's a little difficult. So Cherie, I've been a member of AAUW now like for 52 years, and I've seen a lot going around. Your presentation in terms of dividing up like a membership organization, and the drop of membership, is there, I'm trying to think of how to phrase it, given the way that membership is going down, a lifespan that one is seeing to be a vital organization in terms of changing it to the other type of organization you're talking about. And number two, I remember some years ago, and it was Carolyn Garfine and others that did just a very special fundraising that went on, I don't know, for 1 or 2 years, that gave some more money to the organization. Is there thought of doing something like that? So that's 2 questions. And I'll
Okay,
mute myself.
thanks, Toby. If I understand the first question, is there a natural life cycle for like a membership organization, and could we convert ourselves into a non-membership organization? Well, first of all, it would take a vote of the membership to do that. I find it, given that we can't get the membership to vote on opening up membership on a simple question of whether or not you need a degree to support women getting higher education, I'm doubtful that we could ever do that. It might be possible. There are legal ways to do things like that where you can't function and you have to ask the courts to help you, but I don't think we would go that way. I suppose it's possible that the membership might vote for it. You might remember in 2009, was it, when we converted AAUW Inc. into the foundation and renamed the foundation AAUW Inc. We had 2 separate organizations. That was done primarily because the C4, which was the membership organization, was bankrupt. It could not continue. So the way that it continued was to be merged into the foundation. And then the foundation converted itself into half foundation, half membership organization, and that worked for a while. Whether it will work long term, I don't know. I think the bigger threat to us is the threat of right now about how do we think about gender focused advocacy, right? Is the future of the United States particularly right now, is it going to be really hobbled by an effort to undo affirmative action, regardless of what you think about it, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing? That is the question right now, right? That the country is grappling with. And that really impacts AAUW because our focus has always been on supporting women to get them to be considered, equal, have equity with the men in the country. And particularly, we have focused at AAUW on women of color in the past few years because we know that they are disproportionately impacted. So that is a huge threat to the organization. And I think it's one that every single branch, I mean, I don't know how many of you in your online branches have scholarships for women at universities, local universities. There are many local universities that will no longer accept those. They'll tell you, we'll take your money, but it's going to go to anybody that we want, right? Now, National has some greater power to make that happen because we don't operate through an institution. Our money goes directly to the individual. If you try and do that as a branch, you have to take on the whole apparatus of selecting that individual and making sure that you're not violating a whole bunch of laws in the process for doing that. So it's probably not a good idea to do it at the local level where you actually are in control of who gets your scholarship. So that's the threat where I really see is more than the membership organization. AAUW women have always kind of risen to the cause when there was a real need for it. And I just think we will, not without effort, not without kicking and screaming, but we will. Now, I've forgotten the second part of your question, Toby. What was that? Does anybody remember what the second part was?
Toby?
I don't know. Toby, what was the second
It
question?
had to do with a number of years ago. It seemed like there was a big
Fundraising.
fundraising that Carolyn and others did nationally to infuse the organization with money.
Charting the course or something like that. I forget what it was called, but yes, it wasn't.
Right.
It was not terribly successful, and it was successful to a degree, but not as much as we really would have liked. In part, that was a staffing issue at the organization and their ability to fundraise effectively. But you may have noticed recently there have been a lot more calls for donations coming through that are direct online requests. We have talked about doing a fundraiser that would sort of seize the moment, right? Right now, like education is in trouble. This is where we are right now. Help us out with this, and that's being looked at right now. So there may be one of those. Fundraising has become a real science, just like communication has become a real science. So what seems like obvious to people like me, like, well, why wouldn't you do that? Strike while the iron is hot campaign. There apparently are a number of reasons why maybe you would not want to do that. I do see another question in chat. Maybe we could pick that one up, Pat.
Yes. Sue is asking, what do you see as what AAUW does best?
Well, at the national level, what we do best is our fellowships and grants program. Over half of our budget is on fellowships and grants. Our long range overtime building capacity for women in higher level jobs in academia and in business is proven through the work that we have done. We don't always do a great job of publicizing it to our the actual success to our branches, and we do have a program going on right now that is trying to corral the latest sort of statistics of how many people are at executive levels in science, how many people are at executive levels in academia, things like that, so that we can do a better job of it. But we do know, and we do keep in touch with those fellows grants. So at the national level, that is really what we do best. We are not great, I have to say. I mean, being realistic, we are not great at some of our programming. We tried a national STEM program that was similar to Tech Truck It was an online program. It started during the pandemic. It was aimed at high school girls, particularly in lower economic high schools, and it was aimed at their parents as well. It worked fine during the pandemic. It didn't work at all afterwards. And that's not too surprising. But the reason we didn't do well is that we don't have the access to that group, and it takes years to build it. And it was a costly program. And, there was great enthusiasm for it. But when you measure the impact, it was not going to fly. And so we had to eliminate it. Nick Whistle is another one that's similar in that, we got, I think we needed to get 1,000 students there in order for it to pay. And we never got that. We got between 600 and 800. It was an expensive program to operate. We had feedback that was variable on it, even though most of the girls who went thought it was great, but they enjoyed it for the networking. But it didn't bring us, we didn't get sponsors to cover the costs. Our programming in the areas that AAUW was doing the programming were less than great, frankly. The speakers were great, but they all cost money. So you have to say to yourself, well, when you have a staff of 32 people, how many programs can you put on, right, that require day-to-day involvement of the staff? The ones that have been the most successful have been Work Smart and Start Smart. And those are the most successful because our college and university partners really want those programs. And we don't mind whether there are men in them or not. We gave that up, a couple of years ago. It became really obvious that they weren't going to let us do it on campus if we didn't also include men in the programs. Very few men sign up, but those that do, turns out they're just as interested, right, in helping women and girls get paid properly. So understanding that. Our financial program is also very successful. It's all done online. So that kind of programming works. But some of our other in-person programming or outreach programming where we do not have connections already just doesn't work. And people have finally learned a lesson on that. I hope. We'll watch and see what happens over time.
Back to the chat, Bev has a comment that says, whoops, excuse me.
Oh, yeah.
Please, everyone, apply to be on a panel for the fellowships and grants panels.
Yeah, that's a great thing to do. It's a fantastic program. It's very well organized. It's a lot of work. But it's really important. I should say a minute that we are waiting to see how the Trump administration's cutting of funding to graduate programs around the country will impact our fellows. We already have some fellows who are writing us saying, my program was eliminated. So now they haven't gotten the second half of their money. They got the first half, but not the second half, right? So our requirements are you have to be in a PhD program. You have to be writing your dissertation, or you have to be doing a postdoc. So we're going to have to struggle with that. What do we do with that? And so we may be down in what the number of grants that we give next year because the programming may get eliminated. And we have to look at, can we switch around things and do it slightly differently? And that's being looked at right now by the fellowships and grants staff. Like, how much flexibility do we have under the rubric of American fellowships? Or what if we can't get international fellows in the country? All right, we have a few that are stuck outside the country, can't get in. So it's up in the air. But anyway, still apply for the panels because it's a great experience. And I think you really would, it's a good way for people to get involved in AAUW at a different level and to see really the impact of what we do. These women are terrific. There's going to be on the website, I think I saw, or maybe in a note from Gloria, there's going to be a series of little videos from the reception that we just held in New York City in conjunction with our presence at the UN. The CSW or CWS. I can't get the acronym wrong, but anyway, there's International Women's Month. There's a lot of activity at the UN related to women's, and we always have a program there, and we also do a reception in New York City for fellows that are in the New York metro area. And they did little vignette videos of them talking about how important the AAUW fellowship had been to them in their lives. So watch for that. That'll be on the website before long, or part of some kind of video presentation.
Great. Thank you. Another comment, this from Pat Squire. It does seem like this is an opportunity to fundraise, identifying specific things that the funds will go for. A few years ago, let's see if I can get this up. Yeah, a few years ago, oh dear.
Can you not see it? I can read it.
Well,
A few years ago, we did a Now More Than Ever campaign, and that
Yes.
was during the first Trump presidency. And we raised money and had a conference based on now more than ever, we need your support. So I think people are frustrated and they want to give to something, maybe not a party at this point, but something that will make a difference. And if it's worded correctly so that it doesn't get trashed, supporting women should strike a chord. That's just all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Pat. Yeah, it another message overlaid yours, and I didn't see it very well. And another question, doesn't one need to have experience in academia to be in that committee?
I don't think it's a requirement. It's very helpful, particularly in reviewing the PhD candidates and their programs. But we have had people who are not from academia on it. We've been quite successful in doing it. In fact, a current board member, Antonisha Stavlos, who works at the Smithsonian in basically helping small African-American museums around the country survive, was a panelist for one of the programs and for many years, and she did not come out of academia. So I know you don't absolutely have to do it, although I think it's one of their preferences.
Okay. And Bev comments again, you can apply to be on the panel. God, what is going on? You can, Bev, you can apply to be on the panel. Okay, through your national.
Yeah, right through your AAUW national portfolio or whatever, where your picture's on, go right into your membership, and you can go
Your
on the left
profile.
side, it'll say
Yeah.
review panels. You can apply right there.
Ah, thank you. Yeah, I don't know why this is acting the way it is. I'm sorry.
Technology.
It's not my first bad technology day event today.
Randa asked me a question before the program that I can, walking in where angels fear to tread, I can give the answer to, which had to do with would we ever go back to renewals on a specific day. This is a long-standing practice at Bank of America, sorry, at AAUW, that changed when we changed our database system. And the short answer is no. And the reasons for that have to do somewhat with technology, that the database systems that are being built for nonprofits right now are all focused on annual renewals and individual renewals. And to change it would be sort of really catastrophically expensive, but also is not really the way that most memberships organizations operate these days. And so we're trying to keep up with the best practices. I realize that at the branch level, having been at one point a membership chair, that it is easier in some regards for the membership chair to have a 3-month period in which you sort of know that everybody's renewed or not renewed. But the reality of how people renew and move and stuff like that has changed a lot. You set budgets without knowing how many members you're going to have anyway. You just guess at how many members you're going to have. So the real answer is to look at your own procedures and see if there's a way at your own level you can simplify it and by not requiring this. In some some regard, it's about, well, our members are too old, they don't know how to do it, or they don't want to do it, they don't want to pay online. I mean, you can still send a check. It's an expensive way for us to collect money for anything, to get a check, and a time-consuming thing. But you can still do that. I believe you can still, I know you can have somebody sit with you and help you renew. What I don't know is whether they fixed it so that the membership chair can actually go in and do the renewal for somebody. I just don't know the answer to that. Yes, you can. Oh, okay, good. So,
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Well then, thank you so much, Cherie, and back to Georgia.
Okay, what
Thank
just
you
popped
very
up?
much. Let's
Oh.
give a round of applause, please, for
We did get
Cherie,
one more
because
question,
this is
Georgia.
fantastic information.
yeah, thanks. Well, I'm glad it was helpful to you. And, I encourage you to think about at some point raising your hand and saying you'd like to be on the national board. We do have a pipeline. The way you get on the pipeline, the easiest way to get on the pipeline is to first be on a national committee. But we also, because we have all these town halls and interchanges with state presidents and stuff, we also build our pipeline through talking to state presidents. It's not all long-term AAUW members. There are quite a number of people who are just national members. There are quite a number of people that now that I say quite a number, the board is 15 people. So, but there's a good mix of people who are long-term AAUW members, either at the affiliate level, branch level, or at the national level. And there are some who just join, right, when they come on, because we went after them for a specific kind of expertise. You don't have to have a specific kind of expertise. We want your full brain power. And if you have a particular kind of expertise, that's always really helpful, especially finance expertise at a pretty high level. Accounting expertise and investment expertise are always useful. But aside from that, a passion for women and for keeping this organization alive and kicking are really important characteristics. So, and you have to
Okay,
work and play well with other children. That is a requirement.
we'll keep that in mind.
We must work and play well with others.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Toby did have one more question, please.
Yes, Toby
Our
has. a
issues with the
question.
hub part of daily organization rather than on the board level. How was this particular company chosen?
So, yes, the solution for the technology was chosen by the staff. There was oversight by the board in the process that they used to explain the process and why this it's a Salesforce hybrid kind of thing. Salesforce is really, really big in nonprofit systems, but it's not designed just for us. We could not design it just for us. And so there's some wonky things in it that just aren't going to go away. One thing I should have said when I was talking about governance boards versus operating boards, when there's a crisis, the governing board then suddenly converts itself into much more of an operating board, more fingers in. There's that rubric is noses in, fingers out for a governance board. Well, when there's a crisis, those fingers come in, and there was a lot of that, mainly trying to get people at the national office to really focus on what were the most important things to change and to fix, and then how to, working with an outside vendor is tough. I don't know if any of you have ever been through a technology change. At corporations, when they do a technology change, I mean, there's like outside consultants for everything, right? And as working hand in hand with inside. There was no money at AAUW for that. And it was a rough go. And they probably pulled the plug too early. If I had to say pulled the plug, they pressed the go button too early. But there was huge pressure to do it because we were still on that annual membership renewal. Branches start on July 1, and there was just huge pressure to get it going because getting it going in the middle of the year was going to be a real problem. They wanted to tie it to the membership renewal period. So, the decision was made, and was maybe just premature, but there was huge pressure. And I wasn't there when they first started it, but I sure was sat through lots of agonizing meetings about the trauma that was being caused. But I have to say that, you know, if you've ever been in a company that's gone through a bad technology transformation, you know that this is not unusual. This happens. And nobody wants it to happen. But it wasn't like there was some evil genie at the national office trying to make this into a terrible thing, right? So a beta test, not an alpha test. Yes, okay, well, the past is past. Hopefully it's moving along. And the one thing that I can tell you about what the system changes is it changed the entire system for AAUW. We had, I think, you know, like I'm going to just throw out, you know, 75 different systems that all had multiple kinds of the same information and never in agreement. So because individual people will input things differently and they didn't update it, and it was so you know, people, this has solved a huge number of problems for us as an organization at the national level. And but I do admit it was painful at the affiliate level.
Thank you. And I'd like to have a round of applause and thank you, Cherie. You have given us so much insight and information we didn't have. I love learning something I didn't know before. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it.